Hello everyone, my name is Catherine, and today I will be speaking about the Florentine Codex. While there are many different parts of the Florentine Codex, today we will be focusing on Book 9, The Merchants. Book 9 of the Florentine Codex is one of the final chapters of the Codex, highlighting the merchants within the Nahuatl communities and the various different aspects and factors that the merchant communities held. As we continue, we will learn more about what was traded and the customs and traditions within them and how they evolved over time, putting emphasis on their customs and the way that their lords and peers viewed them. Let's first take a closer look at the history of the Florentine Codex before getting into the details of Book 9. The Florentine Codex consists of 12 books on Nahuatl culture, providing an understanding of what Nahuatl life was like and the many different aspects of it. The Nahuatls were the original inhabitants of Mexico in the 16th century. Bernardino de Sahagún, a friar and anthropologist, sought to preserve the customs and lives of the Nahuatls through his work. It was originally written in Nahuatl and later translated by Sahagún and indigenous scholars, which are not often named, but still carry great importance in the creation of the Codex. The Florentine Codex can be considered an encyclopedia of the Nahuatl culture, offering an in-depth observation of the Nahuatl people. Sahagún gathered information about Nahuatl culture through interviews and questionnaires given to individuals of authority in indigenous towns. The Codex contains both the original Nahuatl and Spanish translations, making it a valuable resource for understanding Aztec society. Eventually, in 2002, the Florentine Codex was translated to English. This is why it can be considered one of the richest sources for understanding ancient cultures of Mesoamerica. While there are 12 different books and various different topics within the Florentine Codex, the main focus of this will be Book 9. Book 9 of the Florentine Codex consists of chapter 1 through 21 and is dedicated to the role of the merchants and their critical involvement in trade. The first half of the chapters covers their customs, traditions, and banquets, while the second half speaks more about the way certain things are crafted, but does not exclude other banquets. With the difference in the chapters, it shows how many different factors really go into the trade system, not the trade itself. Book 9 of the Florentine Codex covers the topic and aspect of the merchants and their traditions. Through the codices, we are able to hear about the changes in their trades and how oftentimes, with the changes of the merchant lords, there was a change in their merchandise. In the beginning of the merchant trades, it began in Tlatelolco, Mexico, with the Lord Cuauhtémoc and the merchant leaders Itzcoatzin and Xiatecatzin. As time went on, the lords and the merchant leaders would often change, as well as the merchandise that was being traded. When the merchants would trade, they traveled to provinces Ayutthaya and Anahuac, where eventually they were held as captives for 4 years, surrounded by people from various other indigenous towns. The merchants even eventually captured natives as well. Throughout these 4 years as captives, they fought and ended up capturing Anahuac. When the merchants returned home, the Lord of Mexico, Ahuitzotzinco, had them greeted and celebrated for their success. Within their festivals, they had various different traditions, like the burning of perfumes, giving the merchants gifts, and the sacrifice of their captives. People would come out specifically to watch these sacrifices, where the captives would sometimes put up a fight. With the successes of the merchants, they became known as lords to their people. Within Chapter 3 of Book 9 of the Florentine Codex, it has more information on the preparations the merchants made before embarking on their trade journeys. When leaving their homes for trade, merchants prepared for their long trips by shaving their heads, knowing that they wouldn't be able to wash themselves while they were outside of their homes. They also had traditions they would do prior to leaving for their trips, like cutting paper and drawing on it using yuli ink, offering them to their gods of the road. This was not the only offering that they gave to their gods. They would also offer decapitated quails and their own blood. By splattering their blood in all different directions and reciting a prayer for safe travels, it would ensure that they would have a prosperous trip. When departing, aside from the preparation, They would say goodbye to their families, who often ensured them that everything would be fine and wished them a safe return. These trips were risky, with the possibility of provinces not receiving them well, and some of these provinces were already at war. Oftentimes, when arriving to these provinces where they went to trade, they would give the gifts that were given to them by the Lord of Mexico as a way of greeting the inhabitants of that province. The head merchants of these groups would often bring slaves for sale. A specific group of merchants was called Nahualotzomeca because of their way of disguising themselves when going to do business. Their reasons for their disguises was to not be recognized as Mexicans while trading and to much rather be seen as the people of the province. The merchants even had their own legal system where the cases were judged by fellow merchants. Lords often honored and respected merchants for their efforts. Not only did they have ceremonies for when they left their provinces, but also for when they returned. They would prepare a banquet, having offerings for their god as well as for themselves. Giving their gods the offerings first, their god was often represented by fire in these ceremonies. Much like the ceremonies held for their departure, there were words shared to express the gratitude they have for the merchants, their efforts, and their safe arrival. The fourth banquet that was held was when they killed slaves, giving them drinks which caused them to become intoxicated and then made them dance and sing all night. After feeding the slaves, they were not allowed to eat again, no matter how much they were encouraged. They killed the slaves one by one. After covering the large subject of their customs and traditions, there will be more talk of the artisans. The artisans that worked with the gold were called hammers or smiths. They would hammer the gold with stones or hammers, attempting to make it as thin as paper. Although I cannot mention every process that was mentioned in the text, I will include the process of the making of some of their metals and accessories. The craftsmen often used charcoal and beeswax molds to cast gold and silver, grounding, pulverizing, and finally powdering it, mixing with clay so eventually it would harden. To harden it, they flattened it similar to tortillas and left it in the sun. After it hardened, they would carve into it with a small metal blade. The carvings were usually animals, as they saw the correspondence to nature, but many other designs were carved in as well. If not carved into this, it is often made into a gold necklace. Much like the merchants, the artisans held festivals for their god Totec every year where they would flay captives. An important factor of the merchants was the merchandise that they obtained and sold, which is mentioned throughout Book 9. Things like gemstones, gold jewelry, macaw feathers, blankets, and various different clothing items. One that is mentioned the most is gold, especially when it comes to the garments worn throughout their various festivals and banquets, often worn by their lords and others that were in positions of power. The merchants made sure to maintain a humble mindset and never directly claim the merchandise that they obtained, often referring to it as their mothers' and fathers' merchandise instead of their own. The Florentine Codex gives us insight into ancient cultures and a look into the Mexican background. With the variety given amongst its books, it gives an insight into all the various aspects of ancient Mexican culture. Not only this, but it gives a few of the things that are not often known of ancient Mexican communities. Merchants are an important part of the Mesoamerican culture, and for that reason, Book 9 gives us a view into the culture and the traditions that go behind it. Within Book 9, although it is named The Merchants, it speaks more about the traditions and rituals that were held within the merchant festivals. Book 9 of the Codex gives us insight to the admiration that others had for the merchants and all the work that they did for their communities. Not only do we see this, but we also see the importance of deities and gods within these merchant communities, as their rituals were extremely important to them. The appreciation and praise of the merchants was constant throughout the text, as well as the appreciation of the gods and lords. History can often be lost, but through these 12 books, there is a maintaining of deep Mexican history that has influenced today's Mexican culture. Although I only covered Book 9, there is a great importance in all 12 books of the Florentine Codex, and it is reflected through the hard work that was put into it and the continued investigations using it.